Welcome to Section 14.1, Part 1. This is the 148th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part opens our study of how systems decide who gets to touch what. In this session, we'll unpack the machinery behind authorization. What is the difference between permissions, rights, and privileges? How do systems mechanically enforce access decisions? What principles keep those decisions tight? And how do the discretionary and role-based models actually work? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because you will spend real hours deciding who can open what. Picture a regional credit union rolling out a new lending platform. Loan officers, tellers, and branch managers all need different reach into the same records. Get the authorization design right, and everyone works smoothly with no oversharing. Get it wrong, and a teller reads files meant only for the compliance team. Let's start with a distinction the exam loves. What is the difference between permissions, rights, and privileges? Permissions are what you can do to an object, like read, write, or delete a specific file. Rights are the ability to take an action on a system, like changing the clock or restoring a backup. Privileges are simply the two bundled together. Think of a building. Permissions are which rooms you may enter, rights are which machines you may operate, and privileges are the master set an engineer carries. So how does a system actually enforce access by default? Through a principle called implicit deny. Unless someone is explicitly granted access, the system refuses them, quietly and automatically. Imagine you give one analyst full control of a shared budget file and mention no one else. Everyone else is locked out, even though you never name them. The absence of a yes is treated as a no. This is deny by default, and it is the safe foundation under almost every mechanism. How does the system keep track of who can do what? Two structures organize the same facts from opposite angles. An access control matrix is a central table crossing every subject against every object, listing the exact access each one holds. A capability list flips the view and travels with the subject, carrying a token that says which objects that user or process may reach. The matrix is object-focused, mapped from the resource outward. The capability list is subject-focused, mapped from the person inward. Same permissions, two vantage points. How do you shape what a user even sees? With a constrained interface, rather than let everyone view every function, the application hides or dims the controls a person is not allowed to use. A junior support agent opens the console and simply never sees the delete account button that a supervisor sees. What you cannot see, you are far less tempted to try. The interface itself becomes a quiet guardrail. How can access depend on the data or the situation? Two related controls handle this. A content-dependent control decides based on what is inside the object, like a database view that exposes only customer names and emails while hiding the credit card column underneath. A context-dependent control depends on the surrounding conditions, like requiring a shopper to complete payment before the download page unlocks, or blocking a login outside approved hours. One looks at the what, the other looks at the when and how. What principles keep every grant as tight as possible? Three work together. Need to know limits people to only the data their job actually requires, even if they hold a broad clearance. Least privilege goes a step further and limits their rights to take action, not just their view of data. Separation of duties splits sensitive tasks across two or more people, so no single person can commit fraud unchecked. Together, they form a quiet system of checks and balances that keeps power distributed. Where do all these requirements get written down? In a security policy. This is the document that names what needs protecting and how far the organization should go to protect it. Senior leadership approves it, which gives it authority across the whole business. But notice what it does not do. It states the requirement, such as enforced least privilege, without dictating the exact clicks and configurations. That translation into real controls is your job as the professional. So what are the access control models we build on top of all this? There is one discretionary model and a family of non-discretionary ones. In discretionary access control, every object has an owner, and that owner personally decides who else gets in. Everything else, role-based, rule-based, attribute-based, mandatory, and risk-based, is non-discretionary, meaning administrators manage it centrally for the whole environment. Keep that single dividing line in mind. owner-controlled versus centrally controlled. Let's look closely at the discretionary model first. In discretionary access control, whoever creates or owns an object controls access to it. Build a new spreadsheet, and you own it, so you can hand out or revoke access as you please. Owners can even delegate that power to a data custodian for daily upkeep. It runs on access control lists attached to each object. And because owners edit them freely, the model is wonderfully flexible but never centrally governed. This is exactly how file permissions work on common desktop operating systems. Now the role-based model. How does role-based access control avoid the mess of per-user grants? By assigning privileges to roles instead of people. You define a role by job function, attach the right privileges once, then drop user accounts into it. Back at our credit union, you create a loan officer's role, and every new hire simply joins it and instantly inherits the correct access. Move someone to a new department, and you pull them from the role in one step, cleanly stripping those privileges. This is what stops privilege creep, the slow pile-up of access people accumulate but never lose. So let's bring it together. Permissions, rights, and privileges describe what you can do. An implicit deny means silence equals no. Matrices and capability lists track access from the object side and the subject side. Constrained interfaces, content and context controls, and the principles of need to know, least privilege, and separation of duties keep grants tight. A security policy sets the requirements. A model split into owner-controlled discretionary and centrally controlled non-discretionary, with role-based access being the great defense against privilege creep. In Part 2, we finish the remaining models. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 14.1, Part 2. This is the 149th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part continues our tour through the access control models. In this session, we'll finish the family of models. How do roles and tasks organize access? What makes a rule-based model global? How does attribute-based control add flexibility? How does mandatory access control use labels? And how does a risk-based model decide on the fly? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because choosing the wrong model quietly costs you for years. Picture a hospital network, a defense contractor, and a streaming service. Each one needs a different authorization philosophy to survive. Match the model to the mission, and access stays both secure and manageable. Mismatch it, and you either drown in manual grants or leave dangerous gaps wide open. Let's go a bit deeper on roles. How do roles keep access clean as people move? By tying privileges to the role, not the person, so movement is trivial. When someone leaves a group, every privilege that group carried vanishes from their account at once. Users can also sit in several roles, so a manager might hold the manager, loan officer, and teller roles together. There is a close cousin called task-based access control, where each user gets a specific set of tasks rather than a broad role. Picture a project tool where a member can update only their own assigned tasks and nothing else. Why do so many applications reach for roles? Because roles slash the labor of running the app. Think of a common web publishing platform with a tidy ladder of roles, from subscriber at the bottom up to super admin at the top. Each higher role simply inherits everything below it and adds more. A contributor drafts posts, an author publishes them, an editor manages everyone's content, and an administrator controls the whole site. Define the ladder once, and you drop each new person onto the right rung. Now, a model that treats everyone the same. What defines a rule-based access control model? A single set of rules applied globally to every subject, with no exceptions per person. The classic example is a firewall. It carries an ordered list of rules that permit certain traffic, and it judges every packet against the same list. At the very end sits an implicit deny rule, silently blocking anything the earlier rules did not explicitly allow. The rules do not care who you are. They care only what the traffic is. How do you make rules smarter than one size fits all? With attribute-based access control, an advanced form of rule-based control. Instead of one flat rule for everyone, it writes policies from multiple attributes, like the user's group, their department, the device they carry, and the network they sit on. That lets you write a policy in near plain language, such as allow managers to reach the wide area network from a tablet or smartphone. You get the structure of rules with the precision of real conditions. This is why software-defined networks lean on it so heavily. Now the strictest model of the set. How does mandatory access control decide who gets in? Through labels attached to both subjects and objects, set centrally and never by the user. Give a document a secret label, and only a subject who also carries a matching secret clearance may open it. Labels form a hierarchy of sensitivity, so a top secret clearance usually covers everything below it. Because a clearance alone is not enough, the model layers in compartments, like separate boxes inside a level, so you also need the specific compartment label to enter. That is the need-to-know principle baked directly into the design. Why is mandatory access control called a lattice-based model? Because when you diagram the labels and compartments, it looks like a garden lattice, the crisscross frame you train climbing roses on. Horizontal lines mark the upper edge of each classification level, and small compartments sit within them for extra separation. Classifications run in one of three flavors. A hierarchical environment stacks levels so higher clearance reaches down. A compartmentalized environment isolates each domain with no relationship between them. A hybrid environment blends both, giving fine-grained control that grows harder to manage as it spreads. This model is prohibitive and rigid, more secure than discretionary control, but far less flexible. Finally, a model that adapts in the moment. How does a risk-based model decide access on the fly? By weighing the environment, the situation, and policies written directly into software code. Consider a patient record system. A doctor in the emergency room during an active crisis is judged low risk and granted full access. A pharmacist checking for drug interactions gets narrower access to the same records because the situation warrants less. The model reads signals like the login location, whether multi-factor authentication was used, and whether the device is compliant. Advanced versions even use machine learning to compare current behavior against past patterns and adjust. So let's bring it together. Role-based control ties privileges to roles and beats privilege creep with task-based control as its narrower cousin. Rule-based control applies one global set of rules to everyone, like a firewall. Attribute-based control upgrades that with multi-attribute policies for real flexibility. Mandatory access control uses labels and compartments in a rigid lattice that enforces need to know. And risk-based control decides dynamically from environment, situation, and policy. Choose the model that fits the mission, and authorization stays both strong and sane. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.2, part 1. This is the 150th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part turns from access models to the systems that carry authentication across the web. In this session, we'll study how single sign-on works on the internet. Why should you never hand your credentials to a third party? How does SAML let organizations trust each other? How does OAuth share access without sharing passwords? How does OpenID connect add authentication on top? And how do these three compare? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because you will design logins that touch other companies you do not control. Picture a travel booking app that lets users sign in with an existing email provider. Behind that one friendly button sits a careful dance of trust between separate organizations. Understand the dance, and you build integrations that are both smooth and safe. Miss it, and you either frustrate users or leak credentials across systems that should never share them. Let's start with the core problem these systems solve. Why should you never hand your credentials to a third party? Imagine wanting to move money from one bank to another. You would never give the second bank your login for the first. That would hand over the keys to your entire account. The whole point of modern authentication standards is to let one service act on your behalf without ever seeing your password. They share proof of who you are or what you may do, while your secret stays put. Most of these standards speak a shared language first. What is the role of XML here? Extensible markup language does more than format data for display. It describes what the data actually means, wrapping each value in a descriptive tag. Because vendors from many systems can read and write it, XML became a common tongue for exchanging information. Several of the authentication standards you will meet are built on dialects of XML rather than the raw form. Think of it as the neutral grammar that lets different platforms understand one another. Now, the first major standard. How does SAML let organizations trust each other? Security Assertion Markup Language is an open XML-based standard that carries authentication and authorization details between federated organizations, and it powers single sign-on in the browser. It runs on 3 players. The principal is the user trying to reach a service. The service provider is the site the user wants, like an investment portal. The identity provider is the trusted third party that actually holds the credentials. The user hits the service, gets redirected to the identity provider to log in, and the identity provider sends back signed assertions confirming who they are and what they may access. What exactly does the identity provider send back? 3 kinds of statements inside those assertions. An authentication statement confirms the user proved their credentials, by which method, and at what time. An attribute statement carries facts about the user, such as their entitlements. An authorization statement declares whether the user may reach the requested service, and if not, why. Cloud providers love bundling SAML into their platforms because it hands their customers clean, ready-made single sign-on. 1 redirect, 3 answers, and the service knows exactly who it is dealing with. Now a different tool for a different job. How does OAuth share access without sharing passwords? OAuth is an authorization framework, not an authentication protocol, and that distinction matters. Picture a scheduling app that wants to post to your social media account. Instead of taking your social password, it redirects you to the social platform, which shows you exactly what the app is requesting and asks you to approve. And the platform hands the app a token, not your credentials. The app then presents that token whenever it acts on your behalf. Even if that app is later breached, your actual password was never exposed to it. Note that OAuth grants access, but it does not by itself prove who you are. So how do you add identity on top of OAuth? With OpenID Connect, it is a thin authentication layer built on the OAuth framework, and its key feature is that it delivers both authentication and authorization together. It carries a signed token, a JSON web token, that a service retrieves to confirm the user and can even include profile details about them. You see this every time you log into one site using an account from a large provider, and the whole handshake happens quietly in the background. OAuth answers what you may do, and OpenID Connect adds the answer to who you are. Let's line the 3 up side by side. How does SAML, OAuth, and OpenID Connect compare? SAML is the XML-based standard with 3 entities, delivering authentication, authorization, and attributes. And it shines for browser, single sign-on between organizations. OAuth is a pure authorization framework that trades tokens through application interfaces, so an app can act for you without your password. OpenID Connect sits on top of OAuth, adds real authentication, and carries a JSON web token as its identity proof. If you remember 1 line each, that is your exam anchor. Assertions, authorization only, and authentication layered on OAuth. Now we move inside the walls. How does single sign-on work on internal networks? Inside an organization, the dominant single sign-on method is a ticket-based system we will detail shortly. Remote workers also need to reach internal networks from afar, and 2 protocols handle that access. Beyond simply enabling single sign-on, they deliver the full trio of authentication, authorization, and accounting. That combination is important enough to earn its own family name in the next concept. Inside the network, the goals shift from cross-company trust to centralized, auditable control. What are authentication, authorization, and accounting protocols, and why do they matter? These are protocols that provide those 3 services from one central point. They sit in front of remote access systems, like virtual private networks and other network access servers, and give one shared place to verify and record every connection. That central design also isolates risk. If someone attacks the remote access path, the damage stays with remote users and does not automatically reach internal accounts. Authentication confirms valid credentials. Authorization confirms the connection is allowed. And accounting tracks resource usage, which can even feed billing. 1 gatekeeper, 3 jobs, and a clean audit trail. So let's bring it together. The guiding rule is never to share your credentials with a third party, so these standards share proof instead. XML is the shared grammar, and SAML uses it with 3 entities to federate single sign-on across organizations. OAuth grants access with tokens and no password, while OpenID Connect layers authentication on top using a JSON web token. Inside the network, single sign-on and remote access lean on protocols that centralize authentication, authorization, and accounting. In Part 2, we go deep on the ticket-based systems that run the internal side. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.2, part 2. This is the 151st session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part goes deep on the ticket-based system that runs internal single sign-on, then the 2 protocols that centralize remote access. In this session, we'll unpack the internal authentication workhorses. What is Kerberos, and how does it prove identity with tickets? What are its moving parts? How does a user actually log in and request a resource? Where are its weak spots? And how do Radius and TACAX Plus differ? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these systems quietly authenticate thousands of logins in most enterprises. Picture a manufacturing firm where every employee signs in once each morning and reaches dozens of resources with no further prompts. That seamless experience runs on the exact machinery we're about to open up. When it breaks, the whole workforce grinds to a halt. So you need to know how it hangs together and where it can fail. Let's meet the main character. What is Kerberos and how does it prove identity? Kerberos is a ticket-based authentication system that uses a trusted third party to vouch for who you are. Once you prove your identity, it issues you tickets, and your account presents those tickets to reach resources without logging in again. It leans on symmetric key cryptography and gives authentication traffic both confidentiality and integrity, defending against eavesdropping and replay. Think of a theme park wristband. You verify once at the gate, then flash the band for every ride without repeating the check. What are the moving parts inside Kerberos? A handful of elements do the work. The key distribution center is the trusted third party that authenticates everyone and holds the secret keys. Inside it sit the authentication service, which verifies identities, and the ticket granting service, which hands out tickets. A ticket is an encrypted proof that you may access a specific object with a limited lifetime. A ticket granting ticket is a special first ticket proving you already authenticated, so you can request more tickets. A principal is any entity that can request a ticket, and a realm is the logical domain that Kerberos rules over. So how does the login actually flow? In a careful exchange where your password never crosses the wire. You type your username and password into the client, and the client sends only the username and domain to the authentication server. The server confirms you exist. Then the key distribution center builds a session key and a timestamped ticket granting ticket, encrypting the session key with a hash of your password. It ships both back to the client. Your client decrypts the session key using a hash of the password you just typed. If your password was right, it works. If it was wrong, decryption simply fails, and you are stopped without the password ever traveling. Then how do you reach an actual resource? By trading your ticket granting ticket for a service ticket. The client sends the ticket granting ticket back and asks for access to a resource. The center checks that the ticket is valid and that your account has the privileges for that resource. Then the ticket granting service issues a service ticket. The client hands that service ticket to the server hosting the resource, which verifies it with the center. Once identity and authorization both check out, the two open a session and communication begins. Every step stays encrypted, so credentials and session keys never appear in the clear. Where is Kerberos fragile? In a couple of important places. First, the key distribution center is a single point of failure. Compromise it and every secret key on the network is exposed. Take it offline, and no one can authenticate at all. Second, Kerberos is strict about time. By default, every system must sit within 5 minutes of the others, so organizations sync clocks against a common time source. If a machine drifts out of sync, its tickets stop validating and it loses access to protected resources. Powerful, but demanding of both availability and precise timing. Now, the first, remote access protocol. What does Radius do? It centralizes authentication for remote connections, like virtual private networks or dial-up, when an organization runs several access servers. A user connects to any access server, and that server, acting as the client, forwards the credentials to the central Radius server to verify authentication and authorization and to track accounting. Many internet providers use it so subscribers can connect from anywhere. One useful detail for the exam, Radius by default encrypts only the password, not the whole session, though it can layer on additional encryption. Notice the direction here. The network access server is the client, and the Radius server is the shared authority behind it. How does TACACS Plus improve on that? By separating the three functions and encrypting far more. Where Radius bundles things and protects only the password, TACACS Plus splits authentication, authorization, and accounting into distinct processes that can even live on separate servers. Just as important, it encrypts the entire authentication exchange, not merely the password. It also runs over a connection-oriented transport for more reliable delivery. Think of Radius as one clerk handling everything at a single window, and TACACS Plus as three specialists at three windows, each conversation fully sealed. That separation and stronger encryption are the headline differences the exam wants. So let's bring it together. Kerberos is the internal single sign-on workhorse, using a trusted center and encrypted tickets so your password never crosses the network. Its parts include the key distribution center, the authentication and ticket granting services, tickets, ticket granting tickets, principals, and realms. You log in once to earn a ticket granting ticket, then trade it for service tickets to reach resources. Its risks are a single point of failure and strict time synchronization. And for remote access, Radius centralizes authentication while encrypting only the password, whereas TACACS Plus separates the three functions and encrypts the whole exchange. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.3. This is the 152nd session of the CISSP exam prep series. In this session, we'll explore zero trust access. What is wrong with trusting the inside of your network? What does zero trust replace that trust with? Who are the subjects in this model? How does the policy decision point actually decide? And how does the policy enforcement point carry out that decision? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the old idea of a safe internal network no longer holds. Picture a company where a contractor's stolen laptop already sits inside the perimeter, and remote staff log in from cafes and airports every day. There is no clean edge left to defend. As a security professional, you will be asked to design and defend architectures that assume the attacker is already in, and zero trust is the framework for exactly that. Let's start with the flaw in the old approach. What is wrong with trusting the inside of your network? Traditional designs work like a castle with a moat. You harden the outer wall, and once someone is past it, they roam freely inside. The problem is obvious once you say it aloud. Anyone who breaches the wall, or was let in for one reason, now has broad trust they never earned. A single stolen credential turns into free movement across the whole environment. That inherited trust is the very thing zero trust throws away. So what does zero trust replace that trust with? Constant verification. Zero trust assumes there is no trust boundary and no network edge at all. Every single action is validated at the moment it is requested as part of continuous authentication. Nothing is waved through just because of where it came from. Before access is granted, the system checks a bundle of signals, like identity, permissions, the device's configuration and security posture, and current threat intelligence. Trust is never granted once and kept. It is earned again with every request. Who are the subjects in this model? Subjects are whoever or whatever is asking for access. That includes human users, but it deliberately reaches wider. Services, automated agents, and other systems all count as subjects when they request access or try to use their rights. The model does not care whether a request comes from a person at a keyboard or a background process on a server. Each one is an untrusted requester that must prove itself. Framing every actor this way is what lets zero trust treat all traffic with equal suspicion. Now the brain of the system. How does the policy decision point actually decide? It has two cooperating halves. The policy engine is the part that makes the call. It runs a trust algorithm that weighs inputs from external systems like identity management, threat intelligence, and security monitoring, then decides to grant, deny, or revoke access. The policy administrator is the part that acts on that decision. It is not a person, but a component that opens or tears down the connection between a subject and a resource, issuing session credentials when access is allowed, and ordering the session ended when it is not. Together, the engine and the administrator form the policy decision point. And how does the decision get carried out on the wire? Through the policy enforcement point. This is the component that actually sits in the path between the subject and the resource. It forwards each request to the policy administrator and then does whatever it is told, either allowing the connection or ending it. In practice, it is often split into two pieces, a local piece near the subject, like a client or app, and a gateway piece along the network path to the resource. Think of the decision point as the judge and the enforcement point as the officer at the door who carries out the ruling. So let's bring it together. Traditional moat and castle designs hand out broad inherited trust the moment someone is inside, and that is the flaw. Zero trust removes the trust boundary entirely and validates every action continuously against identity, posture, and threat data. Subjects are any requester, whether a person, a service, or a system. The policy decision point, made of the policy engine and the policy administrator, decides using a trust algorithm and then opens or closes the path. The policy enforcement point sits in line and executes that ruling. Assume breach, verify everything, and trust nothing by default. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.4, part 1. This is the 153rd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part begins our study of how attackers defeat access controls, starting with elevation and password cracking. In this session, we'll get inside the attacker's playbook. What is an attacker really after? How do the basic risk terms fit together? How does privilege escalation spread through a network? How do the su and sudo commands change accountability? And how do dictionary and brute force attacks crack passwords? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because you cannot defend against a move you do not understand. Picture a mid-sized retailer whose network gets probed every single day. To stop these attacks, your team has to think the way the attacker thinks, spotting the technique before it lands. Knowing exactly how credentials get stolen and privileges get elevated is what lets you place the right control in the right spot instead of guessing. Let's define the opponent clearly. What is an attacker really after? An attacker is anyone attempting to exploit a weakness and break confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Their motives run from money to power to simple notoriety, and the fallout can include lost data, downtime, and reputational harm. The word hacker once meant a harmless enthusiast, but common usage has blurred it, so we will simply say attacker for anyone with malicious intent. The point is not the label. It is that a deliberate adversary is trying to get past your controls. Before the attacks, let's anchor 3 terms. How do risk, threat, and vulnerability fit together? A vulnerability is any weakness, like a missing patch or the absence of a control. A threat is a potential event that could cause harm, whether a criminal, a flood, or an honest employee mistake. Risk is the likelihood that a threat actually exploits a vulnerability and causes a loss. Picture a cracked window latch. The cracked latch is the vulnerability, a burglar in the area is the threat, and the chance of a break-in through that latch is the risk. You reduce risk by fixing weaknesses or blunting threats, never by chasing zero. Now, the first major attack technique. How does privilege escalation spread through a network? Privilege escalation is any move that gives a user more power than they should have. It comes in two directions. Vertical escalation climbs upward, turning a regular account into an administrator on the same machine. Horizontal escalation moves sideways, reusing that foothold to compromise other accounts and computers at the same level, which is also called lateral movement. Attackers chain the two, land on one user through a phishing click, climb to admin, hop to the next machine, and climb again, often reaching domain-wide control. A key defense is keeping service accounts locked to only the privileges they truly need, never granting them broad system rights for convenience. How do the su and sudo commands change accountability? On a common family of server systems, the all-powerful account is called root. The su command switches you fully into that root account after you enter the root password. And from that point, the logs record activity as root, not as you. The sudo command works differently. It lets an approved user run a single command with elevated power using their own credentials, and the logs record it under their own name. That difference is everything for accountability. With su, actions blur into a shared super user. With sudo, every elevated action is tied to a real person you can audit. Now the softest target of all. Why are passwords the weakest form of authentication? Because people choose predictable ones and reuse them everywhere. Breach data repeatedly shows users picking simple strings and obvious sequences that a program guesses in moments. A strong password is long and mixes character types. And length matters most, because each added character multiplies the work an attacker faces. Two more habits sink security: weak hashing and unchanged defaults. Systems should never store passwords in the clear. Only strong hashes, and outdated hashing like the compromised MD5 must be retired. And every default password, especially on connected devices, has to be changed before it becomes an open door. Let's start with the simplest cracking method. How does a dictionary attack work? It tries passwords from a prepared list of likely candidates rather than every possible combination. That list holds real dictionary words, but also the weak strings people actually use, like common sequences and the word password itself. Smart versions also test one-upped variations, taking a known password and nudging a single character so password becomes password 1 or 1 password. And do not assume a foreign word saves you, because cracking dictionaries include many languages. It is fast precisely because it bets on human predictability. When the list runs out, attackers go exhaustive. How does a brute force attack work? It systematically tries every possible combination of letters, numbers, and symbols until one matches. No one types these by hand. Programs generate the guesses, and modern graphics processors can test enormous numbers per second, especially against a stolen database offline. A hybrid approach runs a dictionary first, then brute forces the one-upped variations. Here is the defender's lever. Length and complexity make the search space explode, so a long password using all 4 character types can push the cracking time from hours to something wildly infeasible. Every extra character buys you exponential protection. So let's bring it together. An attacker is any adversary trying to break confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And risk is the chance a threat exploits a vulnerability. Privilege escalation climbs vertically to admin and moves horizontally across machines, so you keep service accounts minimal. The su command blurs accountability into root, while sudo ties each elevated action to a real user. Passwords are the weakest link, so you demand length, strong hashing, and change defaults. And dictionary attacks bet on predictability, while brute force attacks grind through every combination, both defeated by long, complex passwords. In part 2, we continue with more advanced password and ticket attacks. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.4, part 2. This is the 154th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part continues the attacker's playbook with smarter password attacks and ticket theft. In this session, we'll climb from crude cracking to precision credential theft. How does a spraying attack dodge lockouts? How is credential stuffing different? What is a birthday attack really finding? How do rainbow tables speed cracking? And how do salts stop them? And how do tools like Mimikatz steal hashes and tickets outright? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the most damaging attacks skip guessing passwords entirely and steal the proof instead. Picture a professional services firm where an attacker never once types a password but still logs in as the domain administrator. That is the world of hash theft and ticket forgery. To defend it, you have to understand exactly what these tools grab from memory and why your existing password policy does nothing to stop them. Let's start with a smarter online attack. How does a spraying attack dodge account lockouts? Instead of hammering one account with many guesses, it tries a single password across a long list of accounts, then loops back with the next password. Lockout policies trigger when one account fails too many times in a short window. So by spreading a few attempts thinly across everyone, the attacker stays under the threshold on any single account. Imagine a policy that locks after 5 bad tries in 30 minutes, but the spraying loop takes 15 minutes per pass. Each account sees only a couple of failures before the timer resets, so it never locks. Low and slow beats the counter. How is credential stuffing different from spraying? The two get confused, but the goal is not the same. Spraying tries to slip past lockout limits. Credential stuffing simply replays known good username and password pairs, checking each one just once per site. It works because people reuse the same credentials everywhere. When one site is breached and its login database leaks, attackers take those pairs and try them automatically across hundreds of other sites. If someone used the same password on their streaming service and their bank, one leak unlocks both. Unique passwords per site break the attack completely. Now, a clever attack rooted in math. What is a birthday attack really finding? It hunts for collisions, two different inputs that produce the same hash. The name comes from a surprising statistic. In a room of just 23 people, there is roughly a 50% chance 2 of them share a birthday. Collisions are far more likely than intuition suggests. Applied to hashing, an attacker does not need to find your exact password. They only need any password that produces the same hash, because to the system, a matching hash is just as good. You blunt this by choosing hash functions whose output is long enough that finding a collision stays computationally out of reach. How do rainbow tables speed up cracking, and how do you stop them? A rainbow table is a giant pre-computed database of passwords paired with their hashes. Normally, a cracker must guess a password, hash it, then compare, over and over, which is slow. With a rainbow table, all that hashing is already done, so the attacker just matches stored hashes against a stolen database at high speed. The defense is a salt, a chunk of random data added to each password before hashing. Salts make pre-computed tables useless, because the attacker would need a fresh table for every possible salt. Adding a pepper, a secret constant kept outside the database, hardens it even further. Now a tool that skips cracking altogether. How does Mimikatz steal credentials from memory? Single sign-on systems hold credentials in memory so users are not prompted repeatedly, and this tool reads that memory directly. It can pull plaintext passwords and pins from the process that handles logon security, extract password hashes, grab Kerberos tickets, and even lift certificates and private keys. Attackers often run it as fileless malware loaded straight into memory, leaving little on disk. The lesson is stark. Once an attacker has enough access to read a machine's memory, your carefully chosen password never even has to be guessed. It is simply lifted. So what do attackers do with a stolen hash? They pass it. In a pass-the-hash attack, the attacker sends a captured password hash directly to an authenticating service, never needing the real password behind it. Normally your client hashes your password and sends the hash, so an attacker who already holds the hash can just replay it. After gaining a foothold on one machine, they harvest hashes from memory, authenticate as that user, and move laterally to the next system, repeating until they find where an administrator recently logged on. The strongest defense is upstream. Prevent that first machine from being compromised in the first place. Kerberos itself becomes a target too. What are the main Kerberos exploitation attacks? Several attacks abuse the ticket system. In Pass the Ticket, attackers harvest tickets from memory and inject them to impersonate a user. A silver ticket forges a service ticket from a stolen service account hash, granting that service account's privileges. A golden ticket is the worst case. Steal the hash of the special Kerberos account that signs all tickets, and the attacker can forge tickets for anything at will across the domain. There are also guessing-style attacks that abuse Kerberos responses to enumerate valid usernames or to harvest tickets that can be cracked offline. The through line is that stolen ticket material is as good as a password, and sometimes far more powerful. So let's bring it together. Spraying dodges, lockouts by trying one password across many accounts, while credential stuffing replays reused pairs across many sites. Birthday attacks exploit how easily hash collisions arise, and rainbow tables pre-compute hashes for speed, which salts and peppers defeat. Tools like Mimikatz skip guessing entirely, lifting passwords, hashes, and tickets straight from memory. Pass the hash replays a stolen hash without the password, and Kerberos attacks like silver and golden tickets forge access from stolen ticket material. The unifying lesson is to protect that first machine, because once memory is readable, guessing no longer matters. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 14.4, part 3. This is the 155th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part closes out access control attacks with interception, impersonation, and the defenses that tie it all together. In this session, we'll finish the attack landscape and pivot to protection. How does a sniffer attack read traffic off the wire? What are the common spoofing attacks? And what is the practical checklist of controls that defends against all of this? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because after learning a dozen attacks, you need a clean set of defenses you can actually deploy. Picture a logistics company hardening its network after a scare. Leadership does not want a lecture on threats. They want a concrete list of what to turn on. This session gives you exactly that. The layered controls that shut down the attacks we have been studying across this whole topic. Let's start with quiet interception. How does a sniffer attack read traffic off the wire? A sniffer is software that captures packets crossing a network. Administrators use them for legitimate troubleshooting, but an attacker uses the same tool to grab anything traveling in the clear, including passwords and file contents. If credentials cross the wire unencrypted, a sniffer simply reads them like an open postcard. The defenses stack neatly. Encrypt sensitive data in transit, drop insecure protocols in favor of their secure versions, use one-time passwords where encryption is not feasible, lock down physical access to network gear, and watch for sniffers with intrusion detection. Encryption is the anchor, because scrambled traffic gives a sniffer nothing worth reading. Now, impersonation in its many forms. What are the common spoofing attacks? Spoofing means pretending to be something or someone you are not, and it shows up across several channels. In IP spoofing, an attacker forges the source address on their traffic to hide their identity or masquerade as a trusted system. In email spoofing, the from address is faked, so a message looks like it came from a colleague or a bank, which is the engine behind most phishing. In phone number spoofing, the caller ID is falsified, often stamped with your own area code so the call feels local and safe. A fake login screen that harvests whatever you type is spoofing too. The common thread is a forged identity used to earn trust it never deserved. Now the payoff. What is the practical checklist of controls that defends against all of this? A layered set of measures, each closing a specific door. Control physical access, because an attacker at the console can steal the password file outright. Tightly control and monitor electronic access to sensitive files, especially the databases that hold credentials. Hash and salt passwords. And consider a pepper to make stolen hashes brutal to crack. Mask passwords on screen to blunt shoulder surfing. Deploy multi-factor authentication, so a stolen password alone opens nothing. Use account lockout with sensible thresholds to stop online guessing. Show last logon notifications so users can spot a stranger in their account. And above all, educate people, since an aware user who never reuses passwords or shares them is your strongest control. So let's bring it together. Sniffer attacks silently capture traffic, and encryption is what renders that capture worthless. Spoofing forges an identity across IP, email, phone, and fake screens to steal trust. And your defense is a layered checklist. Physical and electronic access control, salted and peppered hashing, password masking, multi-factor authentication, account lockout, last logon notifications, and user education. No single control stops everything, but stacked together they close the doors that access control attacks try to walk through. That completes our full tour of controlling and monitoring access. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session.